Hey guys, how are you? I'm going to read the second chapter of the Mushoku tensei, and I hope you guys are liking the first chapter. Let's get started. Expressionless Maid. Part 1. Laya was once a guard maid for the Asura's concubines. A guard maid is a maid who is also a guard. Guard maids usually do a maid's job, but if anything happens, they will take up a sword to protect their master. Laya faithfully accomplished her duty. As far as her maid is concerned, there were no complaints. But as a sword fighter, her ability is average, a dime a dozen, and thus she got careless in a battle against an assassin who targeted a newly born princess and got severely injured in the leg by the enemy's dagger. The dagger was coated with poison that was specifically meant to kill loyalty. There was no antidote or healing magic that was capable of treating such a calamitous poison. The wound was immediately treated, and she survived thanks to her doctors trying a variety of methods to cure her. But there were side effects that lingered. There was no problem caused to her everyday life, but she could never run or stomp again. The kingdom then sacked her without hesitation. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, and Laya accepted her fate. Having lost her ability, it was given she would lose her position, even though she wasn't given compensation money. She considered a fortune that she wasn't secretly silenced because she served in the inner palace. Laya then left the capital. The mastermind behind the assassination attempt wasn't found. Having understood the rules of concubine staffs, she knew there was a possibility she might become the next target. Perhaps the palace let Laya wander to lure the mastermind. She always wondered why she, who had no significant background, had been accepted in the inner palace. It was now that she finally understood. They simply wanted to hire maids who could be used and discarded. No matter the reason, however, she had to leave the capital as quick as possible for her own safety. Even though the kingdom treated her as a bait, she had no obligation to stay, as she was not ordered to in any way, and she had no sense of duty to fulfill. Laya discreetly switched stagecoaches while traveling and arrived at the Fedeo region, which had extensive agricultural land and was located at the border. It was a relaxing place of vast wheat fields, with the exception of the fortress city Row, where the ruler lived. Laya intended to find work there, but as her leg was injured, she was unable to find a job that required physical strength. She could resort to teaching swordsmanship, but it was best for her to be hired as a maid because the salary was higher. At this border, there were many who could wield a sword and many who could teach swordsmanship, but a maid truly versed in domestic affairs was relatively rare. Simply, the supply was so low, the salary would be bigger. However, it would be dangerous for her to be hired by the ruler of the Fedeo or any high-class nobility of similar status. Such people will surely have a relationship with the king. If they knew she was a maid who once worked in the concubine palace, there was a possibility she could be treated as a political tool. For that reason, Laya stayed far away. She didn't want to experience any of that situation again, even though it was a little unfair to the princess. Laya hoped to stay far away from this royal's contention for power. But if her salary was too low, then there wouldn't be enough money to send to her family. Trying to find a safe job and guaranteed salary sure wasn't easy. After running across everywhere for nearly a month, Laya came across a recruitment note. A lower-class knight from Buina village, located in the Faido region, was looking to hire a maid. On top of that, the note said he would give special priority to someone with experience in taking care of children or who had knowledge of midwifery. Buina was a tiny village on the edge of Faido, a village among villages, an extremely rural village. It was very inconvenient, and this was the place she sought. The employer, being a lower-class knight, was also an unexpected fine find. And most importantly, she recognized the prosperative employer's names. Paul Greyrat. He was Laya's protege, a noble, prolific son who on one day sternly barged into the dome where Laya was learning swordsmanship. According to him, he had left home after a quarrel with his father and had come to the dojo to learn swordsmanship. Albeit a different style, he too did study swordsmanship at home and soon after surpassed Laya. Laya was not amused by this fact, but she had since understood that she had no talent and gave it up. Paul, who was utterly brimming with talent, was later banished from the dojo after making a mistake. He only left Laya in a single sentence: "I'm becoming a dead venture. A man like a tempest." It was 7 years since they went their separate ways. At that time, he had actually become a knight and got married. Though she didn't know what sort of toils he had experienced in his life, Paul was a bad guy as far as Laya could remember. If she told him of her problems, she was sure that he would help her. If that didn't work out, then she would just mention some past events. There were a few things she could use to negotiate. Having contemplated all these factors, she headed to Buina. Paul employed Laya without any fuss. It seems he was really anxious as his wife, Xanth, was about to give birth. Laya has been extensively taught in midwifery for the princess birth. Moreover, she was someone that Paul was acquainted with, and he knew her background. Laya was received with a warm welcome. Her salary was also more than what she expected, and so her wishes were achieved. The child was born. There weren't any labor issues or anything. It was just that she was screened in the inner palace. There were no problems at all. It was very successful. However, the child didn't cry when he was born. Laya broke into a cold sweat. The baby drew out amniotic fluids immediately after he was born, but he merely lifted his head up without any emotion and made no sound. The expressionless face was reminiscent of a stillborn. Laya touched the baby and he had a heartbeat. He was breathing too, but he just wasn't crying. Laya remembered the words of a senior guard maid. The babies who don't cry at birth usually have complications. That instance, when she thought of this, the baby looked over to her and murmured something in his groaniness. Laya relaxed after hearing that. Even though there was no evidence of it, she felt there would be no problems. The child's name was to be Rudius. He was an uncanny child, never crying or fussing at first. She assumed that his body was slightly weaker, and that taking care of him would require much effort. But such a notion only occurred in the beginning. After Rudius learned how to crawl, he started to move everywhere in the house. Everywhere in the house. Kitchen, back door, storage, cleaning equipment place, fireplace, etc. He even climbed on the second story, though one couldn't imagine how he did so. Either way, he would disappear whenever nobody kept an eye on him, but he was always to be found somewhere in the house. Rudius never left the home. He would occasionally look outside the window, but it seemed that he was still scared to go outside. Laya was instinctively afraid of this boy, and one had to wonder when it began. It was probably the moment when she heard him after his disappearance. Most of the time, Rudius would be smiling. Sometimes he would be looking at the vegetables, staring at the flickering candle flames, or just looking at the panties that were yet to be washed. Rudius mumbled sounds and showed a smile that made people feel simply disgusted. It was a smile that naturally disgusted people. When Laya was working in the inner palace, she had to go to the main palaces for her mission, and the higher-ranked officer nobles that she met there had similar smiles. They were bald, had podgy bellies, and were leering at her when they stared at her breasts. Very similar to a baby that was born not long ago. It was especially scary when she had to carry Rudius His nostrils would flare and the corner of his mouth would rise, and his breathing hastened as he buried his face into her chest. And then he would make strange noises, seemingly laughing as he made these sounds at that instant. Lila's body was dominated by a terrible shivering cold, and she had the urge to throw the baby and smash him in the ground. This baby was not cute in any way. The smile caused fear in others. It was the same smile the higher-end officers had when they brought many young female slaves. He was supposed to be a baby who had been just born. Laya felt unbearable discomfort and even experienced feeling of peril when she thought things over. This baby was very strange. Could there be that there was something bad possessing it, or perhaps it was something similar, like a curse? Having thought through this she started to feel extremely anxious. She went to the item shop and spent the pitiful amount of money that she had to buy some necessary things. When the grey rats went to sleep, she did her home ritual to chase the evil away. Of course, this was kept away from Paul and his family. The second day, after carrying Rudius again, Laya understood it was useless. It was still as disgusting as usual. It was eerie that a baby would show such an expression. Then it said, when feeding this baby milk, he would lick. This had become outrageous. Paul had no restraint when it came to women, but never did he become disgusting to this extent. It was too strange to be dismissed as heredity. Laya remembered again. She had heard of a story in the past, an Azurian prince was possessed by a demon. To revive that demon, he would crawl around on his limbs every night. And when an unsuspected maid hugged him, the princess stabbed her with a knife hidden behind him, killing her. It was too scary. Is Rudius something like that? There was no doubt he was that kind of a devil. He is still obedient for now, but one day he will awaken, and when everyone is asleep, one by one he will. It's too early to decide this. I shouldn't have taken the job. I'll get attacked sooner or later. Laya was a person who seriously believed in such superstitions. Part 5. During the first year of her work, she was still afraid of him, but she didn't notice when Rudius' unpredictable moods started to change. He didn't disappear as and when he wanted, and usually stayed in Paul's study on the second floor. Speaking of the study, it was just a room with a few books. Rudius stayed there without leaving. Laya secretly observed him and found him mumbling to himself while reading the book. It was a meaningless mumble, or was supposed to be at least, for it wasn't a commonly used language in the central continent. It was still too early for him to be learning how to talk. Of course, he had yet to be taught all alphabets. He was just an infant looking at the book, making random noises. Or else it would be too strange. Laya always had a feeling that those sounds carried meaning and structure. Rudius seems to understand the context of the book. It was too frightening. Laya always thought that when she observed Rudius from the gap in the door jab. However, she never felt disgusted with him for some inexplicable reason. Come to think of it, the unknown source of discomfort gradually disappeared from the moment he confined himself to that room. Though he occasionally showed that disgusting smile, but she carried him and didn't feel unpleasant. He wouldn't bury his face into her chest, and he wouldn't suddenly pant. Why has she always found him scary? Recently, she began to feel that he was sincere and hard-working, and didn't want to disturb him. Zenith seems to share her sentiments. After that, Laya felt that not to care for him was better. It was an idea that went against common sense. In fact, it was abnormal for human beings not to care for a child who was born not long ago. But recently, there were signs of knowledge in Rudius' eyes. He's shown only sheep-can eyes a few months back. But at this point, there was a strong will, and Daisy acknowledged him. What should she do? Even though she had the knowledge of taking care of children, the inexperienced Laya found it hard to discern. She couldn't remember whether it was her guard maid senpai or her mother back in her hometown who said this, that there was no correct way to bring up a child. At the very least, she no longer felt disgusted, uncomfortable, or frightened. But she decided it was best to not disturb him and let him revert back to how he was originally. Let's just leave him as he is, Lila finally concluded. And that is the end of chapter 2, which is basically explaining Rudius' character from Lila's perspective. I think this is kind of interesting, but this is also one of the flaws of the main character. He is kind of perverted. And that's the reason why I feel that this book is kind of uncomfortable in many ways. But you'll get over it soon, and hopefully you guys are liking it. And I will see you guys next time, or for chapter 3 of the Mushoku tensei. Bye guys, and hope you subscribe to my channel. Bye.